present humps, hopes, port humps, colors turn hush. Color, hump, order, hump. Color, ready, cut, one.
All right, everybody, have a seat. All right. FTP, you can sit at ease. Hope you guys are paying attention to what we got to discuss today. So, semi-annual commander's call. I can't believe it's been 6 months since we did this last, but good morning to everybody. Thanks to some of our AFID officers for coming out and joining us this morning. I think it's a good reminder for you guys of the emphasis that the Air Force puts on education and continuing education and advanced academic degrees. So, you know, you're in a phase right now with your undergraduate degrees and pursuing your commission that just is the start of a process that will continue for as long as you're in the Air Force. Literally every year that you're in the Air Force, you'll have some sort of training or education program that you're involved in one form or another. Okay, next slide. Quite a few things to talk about. Next slide. So obviously back in December, we got a new Secretary of the Air Force. This should not be news to anybody. In fact, I would expect you guys to already have this in your warrior knowledge for your chain of command. So the Honorable Beverly James, sworn in by Secretary Hagel back on December 20th. She is the second female to hold this office as the Secretary of the Air Force. She's got a long history, a long career, 30+ years. Inside the Department of Defense as a government employee, and then also in industry as well, particularly in SAIC. Next slide. So what does that mean? That means she's now the senior civilian appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate, responsible for the training, equipping, organizing, and welfare of 690,000 active duty airmen, Air National Guardsmen, and reservists, civilians and their families. They're 23rd in the line as the Secretary of the Air Force. So she's got a big job in front of her with all the things that are going on in our Air Force as far as budgets and reductions and whatnot. She'll be tested for sure, but we wish her all the best. Next slide. So what's the Chief of Staff talking about? You can go ahead and click on the picture there. It'll launch.
The last couple of times I've talked to you, we've been talking about issues that are pretty uncomfortable. Things that we're struggling with a little bit in our Air Force. We've just added another one to the plate with some people who could potentially have set their integrity aside. Let me deal with those things. And by the way, the fact that we are dealing with them doesn't take away from the fact that 99.9% of you out there still rock, and you do the nation's business in a phenomenal way each and every day. In fact, every day, 220,000 airmen are directly supporting commander operations around the world, and you do it incredibly well. The reason you do it so well is because we have always been the best trained Air Force on the planet, and it can't change. We have to stay that way. As we look to the future, declining budgets, concerns about resources, the one thing we cannot lower on the priority list is the way we push our airmen to learn and improve in their warfighting skills. We've got to make sure that our training is realistic, that it's tough, that it's competitive, and that we constantly increase the technical difficulty the same way the threat is increasing. Be really good at what you do, and make everybody around you better at what they do. Take care of our nation. Take care of each other.
All right, so you guys should be well aware of the the attention that next slide that some folks up in our ICBM mission got up in Air Force Global Strike Command, and that's a big part of what the chief was talking about right there. One of the things you guys have to realize is year after year, in survey after survey, the military remains one of the most respected establishments, organizations in the United States. Amongst the citizenry of the United States, they typically have a higher view of the military than just about any other organization. And that's for good reason, but that also comes with a very high burden of maintaining standards and of upholding the expectations of the citizenry of this country. Next slide. So obviously this has got the attention not just of the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, as you saw there, but Secretary Hagel has gotten personally involved, and of course Secretary James is going to be personally involved. Going to take a hard look at this mission area, going to look at what if there were reasons that contributed to these lapses of integrity. By all accounts, at this point, pretty widespread. So this was obviously an organizational culture and climate issue. And one of the things that the AS-400s and I have talked about is, what do you do when you come into an organization and you identify something that is clearly part of the established organizational climate, and then you as the newcomer have got to make a decision, right? You're either gonna go along to get along. You're gonna kind of not try to rock the boat as the new lieutenant, hopefully in all your cases, or are you going to take a stand and try to make people realize that they've kind of lost their sight picture and they've lost sight of the core values in pursuit of one core value, right? These guys were all in pursuit of excellence. They were all in pursuit. They had this idea that they needed to score perfectly on every one of these recurring exams. Well, they violated the first core value, which of course we know integrity is the underpinning of all of them. Next slide. So over the next 60 days, there's going to be a deep dive to take a look at any number of things. But at the end of the day, it's all going to come down to airmen, right? You heard General Welsh talk about the training. Ultimately, what makes our Air Force the best in the world are the airmen, are the people, and how well we train you to do your jobs, and then how well we expect you to execute when the time comes to do that job. Did anybody catch one of those words he said in there about the training? What is it? What do I tell you guys all the time about ROTC and about the Air Force? It's competitive, right? Everything is a competitive process. That is not going to stop when you leave here. That is going to carry all the way on through until the day you hang up the uniform. Next slide. Okay, so he's talking about the Air Force. Each year I like to give you guys just a snapshot of where we're at. So 325,000, just shy of 326,000. That's about 3,000 down from where we were this time last year. More or less the same officer to enlisted mix, 20 to 80, and about the same male to female mix as well. You can see there, the program that you're in remains by far the largest commissioning source in our Air Force, with the Air Force Academy as the second. And then the Air Force Reserve Command and the Air National Guard both down a little bit in their numbers, about 1,200 apiece on those sides as well, but maintaining more or less the right size. Pretty big drop in the Department of the Air Force civilians. We're at just shy of 180,000. That's down almost 4,000 from last year. So there's been some pretty big reductions on the civilian side of the house. And trust me, that creates turmoil in units, especially in organizations. Some bases in our Air Force, we have more government civilians that work there than we do uniformed airmen. So when these things start happening in the civilian workforce, it can cause a lot of turmoil. Next slide. So where's that historically? Well, you can see there, you know, from the time we became an independent service, some pretty huge growth associated with the Korean War and kind of the Cold War coming into focus, and then it's been a steady decline ever since then. But you can see since the early 90s, we haven't had a really significant reduction, large reduction. So we're basically where we need to be for the missions that are assigned to us, and our senior leaders are confident in that. However, if our budget gets reduced, then we have less money to go out and pay for the things that we need, and so the size of the force becomes consider working with. So where does that lead us? Next slide. To force management. Some of you have probably either heard about this or read about this, but over the next year there's going to be some very significant force management programs going on. And basically force management is what the Air Force says when we have more airmen than we need, and we need to find ways to reduce the size of the force. People aren't leaving voluntarily. You know, people get a lot of satisfaction out of their jobs, and the civilian job market has not been great. So now we've got to find ways to potentially involuntarily get people to leave the service. Next slide. The chief's been talking for a while, ever since last April when the sequester hit. He's been talking about the fact that if we stay at these sequester budget levels, we're going to need to be reduced by about 25,000 airmen. That was the target that we would need to draw down. Next slide. You guys heard probably there was an appropriation with a lot of fanfare. Congress passed an appropriation back in December. The President signed it. That was great. It was progress as measured with things in Congress these days, but that was still $32 billion below the authorization that had been passed earlier in the year. So that's a $32 billion disconnect that the Department of Defense has now got to reconcile. Next slide. So what are we going to do about it? Right now the target is 22,500 more or less, and you can see the breakout there between officer and enlisted. This is going to be across the force, and these are significant numbers. So basically the chief said we were going to need to lose 25,000. In the first year, we're going after all of it. That's what you'll tend to see from our senior leadership. What the senior leaders don't want to do is drag this out for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years and have this continue to create turmoil and uncertainty amongst the force. So it's going to be a very uncomfortable process over the next 12 months, but at the end of it, everybody that is still here has a reasonable expectation of being able to stay here. So we're just going to go ahead and get it over and done with. And that, in my experience, that tends to be the philosophy of our senior leaders. We don't want to kick that can down the road. We're just going to get the hard work over and done with. Some of our sister services don't take that approach. They'll kind of try to drag it out and hope that maybe something will change. Maybe Congress will put some money back. Your Air Force tends not to do that in my experience. So, next slide. There's a variety of programs there that we're going to be going through. Folks in our unit are affected by this, right? We've talked about this before. You know, the majority of the cadre in this unit will be subject to one or the other of these. So this is not, you know, as I said, when you pass through that gate of earning your commission, if you do that, there's still no guarantees. You always serve, you know, at the pleasure of the President and of the senior leaders. So, next slide. The only reason I put this slide up there is I want you to see that this is a pretty aggressive timeline. So you can see there in the boards are meeting basically now through March. Most of the officer boards are meeting later on in the summer, June, July time frame. But you can see there from the time the board meets, airmen will be notified within a month or so, and then in most cases, those airmen will be retired or separated less than 6 months after that. So you're facing the prospect of a board meets, you get notified about a month later that you've been selected for separation, and then 4 to 5 months later you're going to be out. There's some separation pay that you'll get, but the other point that this speaks to is you always need to be preparing yourself for those transitions. Ideally, those transitions will happen when you want them to on your timeline, but there are never any guarantees about that. So, you know, Captain Russell gets up here and talks to you guys about financial planning and financial management. This is one more reason to always be doing that. You don't want to have yourself in a financial situation that this is going to cause you serious problems, or, you know, even jeopardy in terms of defaulting on loans, bankruptcy, those types of things. So it needs to start now and continue on through your career. Next slide. I think everybody's probably heard about this. General Welsh, as he does, is big on the sense of the field. He wants to know kind of what airmen are looking for. So a lot of these most recent uniform board changes came directly from the field. We're well aware of the changes to the PT socks and shoes, because I've seen them literally the first week that changed. We saw the black socks coming out. It's like you guys were waiting for that change to happen. So there was definitely no delay there. The change on the cell phones is pretty significant if you're on an Air Force base. So no restriction on the colors, so long as they're not being worn, clipped to your uniform, or clipped to a purse. So basically, if they're not visible, they can be any color. Morale Squadron T-shirts. There's no provision for that in AFROTC, just so you know. But back in the CAF and the MAF, you can expect to see units going back to morale T-shirts for Fridays. Next slide. Okay, so this is the latest safety campaign that's being pushed by the Air Force Safety Center over at Kirtland. So focusing on the most common mistakes that lead to traffic fatalities. Next slide. So this is quite a few separate government studies, National Highway and Safety Traffic Administration, or Traffic Safety Administration. No real surprise here, right? Nobody should be surprised by any of these. Speeding, alcohol, cell phone use, driving without a seatbelt, and then any other driver distractions. So these are all the things. I'm not too sure on the name 5 to drive. I think this is 5 not to drive, obviously. But these are things that you need to be aware of. That year in and year out, you know, cause traffic fatalities. And the sad fact is that in this demographic, in this age group of the folks that are sitting here, you're at most risk. You're at higher risk than just about any other group from a statistical standpoint. Next slide. We've talked about it in the past, but this continues to be, a problem in our Air Force. So you can see there, closing in on 200 motor vehicle fatalities in the last 5 years. That's those are all airmen that had a critical role. They had a critical job in their unit at their base of assignment, and when this tragedy struck, there was a hole there. That obviously impacts the unit directly, because you have somebody that's not available, and then also it obviously impacts the morale and the cohesion of the unit when the other airmen are dealing with this loss. So this is something we just need to try and avoid. And 96%, fully 96%, drug or alcohol related or speed. Next slide. Okay, a couple of admin things I want to touch on. The VRED is very important. Those of you that have been to field training, well, really everybody probably in your initial application package should have done this. You do this when you come into the military, and then as your situation changes or every time you move, you need to continue to fill this form out, the virtual record of emergency data. Next slide. Basically, what this is for is if you're involved in a serious accident, or if you were killed in the line of duty, out of the line of duty, this is the document that the Air Force uses to go and notify your next of kin. Captain Russell and I had a situation a couple of months ago where we were notified that we needed to go and locate the brother of an airman up at Travis that was killed, and he was a retired Navy petty officer living downtown. So we had to get the information, get in our service dress and go down to the last known address. Well, it turns out this airman had not kept his VRED updated, and the brother was no longer at that location. So now there's a scramble going on, trying to call the property rental manager, call people he worked for, trying to find out where he is, because the government takes very seriously this responsibility to notify him as soon as possible that his brother has died. So this is a big deal. For active duty airmen, it's very easy. You can just go in online and you can update it whenever the situation requires. Next slide. So whenever your life situation changes, and then as a minimum, you're told that you should review it or update it with each PCS group. Next slide. Now for cadets, we still use the old paper form, the DD-93 Record of Emergency Data, so all of you should have filled this in when you entered the program. But when you come in for term counseling or whatnot, this is one of the forms that we want you to take another look at. Make sure it's still accurate, make sure the addresses are still correct, because it is important, especially as we send you off to field training where, you're going to be our responsibility for that month. You're going to be on orders, training with the Air Force. Next slide. Dependency and family care plans. This is another one that's a fairly recent change where the cadets are concerned. This is a significant change. So all Air Force members with families will have a family care arrangement. So that's not talking about just people that fall into the category of needing family care plans. Everybody must have family care arrangements. It's just a question of who has to write them down and submit them to their leadership so that they're on file. But bottom line here is the Air Force expects you to pay all your financial obligations, all your just debts are expected to be paid, and if you have a family, the Air Force expects you to take care of your family, especially if you're drawing VAH at the family rate. You have a legal obligation to do that. Next slide. So a couple of folks, or certain categories of folks, have to go a step beyond family care arrangements, right? Single parents, dual military couples, or civilian spouses with unique family situations have to complete the Air Force Form 357, which is a formal family care plan. So now those arrangements that we talked about need to be formally documented, and you need to identify, okay, I'm subject to deployment at any time. You might be in a unit that has a 48-hour task to deployment statement. So if you are a single parent, you've got to already know who are those people that are going to take care of your son or your daughter, or your invalid brother or sister or mother. So you've got to have all that set up. You've got to have the powers of attorney already in place. You've got to update those powers of attorney every year when they expire. There's a little bit of work that goes with this, but this is part of being an airman and being ready to deploy at all times. Next slide. So like we talked about there, you're basically taking care of your dependents in the event of your tasking. So legal, medical, housing, food, transportation, etc. Next slide. So there's an AFI that covers this, but the bottom line is if your situation changes, then within 30 days you need to come and talk to the unit. So you need to talk to your first sergeant or commander or your supervisor, and you need to make sure that if your situation changes from where you didn't require the plan to where you do, then within 30 days you need to come in and get that process started, and then you've got 60 days to get it completed. Next slide. Cadet dependency policy is related, and I sent you guys emails on this. Next slide. Okay, go ahead. So just take a second to read that, but basically what it's telling you is the exact same thing as what we talked about. So if you're a single parent, or if you're married to another military member, which in the case of an AFROTC cadet would mean another AFROTC cadet, then you're required to have a family care plan that covers your time in AFROTC for the same reason. And when you get to your first duty station, you're going to be required to go in and actually update that with your unit. Next slide. But you don't have 30 days, okay? We give you 72 hours for civil involvements. I think 72 hours would be reasonable for this. So basically, and this is the kind of thing you should be coming in and talking to us before this happens, so we can make sure we've got everything. We want to help you do what you need to do to stay in the program. Next slide. Okay, real quickly, the CSAF reading list is out. There's the link there. We'll send that out later on. But there's a bunch of different materials that the chief and the chief master sergeant of the Air Force have identified. You can see there's 12 books, 3 from the chief, 3 from the chief master sergeant, some films, some TED talks, just things that tell the story of the Air Force or of airmen, or things that the senior leaders believe are going to help you become a better professional airman. So I strongly encourage you, if you've never read, if you're not familiar with this, you need to get familiar with it. But you know, when you have some time, look at some of these materials. They put a lot of time into identifying this, and you will find, as a professional airman or somebody that aspires to be a professional airman, there's some pretty helpful messages in this usually. Next slide. Okay, for our AFID officers talking to the CIP office, these were a couple of points of emphasis that they wanted to pass on. Obviously, force management, they should be letting you guys know if you're going to be subject to force shaping or rift board. But as with all of our officers, you know, you need to make sure that you're looking at the eligibility and then making sure your records are tight. So be looking out for that. Fitness, they said, is an ongoing challenge. So they have seen a recent spike in referral TRs. So just make sure you're good there. And again, the point on the records management, or on records for the force management board. Next slide. Okay, the months ahead. Spring is a busy semester, but there's a lot of good stuff in the spring as well. So. We know PSP, I know the folks up back are interested in this, so that's coming up fast next week. We'll nominate everybody, I think by the first week in March we're expecting hopefully to have results. Hopefully it won't be dragged out as much as it was last year, so we'll be looking for another good result. AFA Scholarship Combat Leadership Panel's coming up in just a couple weeks. Make sure you avail yourself of these scholarship opportunities. If you meet the eligibility, then it's a little bit of work to potentially get a real good payoff. And then right now, Quintet, as far as I know, 12th of April, right, is still the date for that, which is a Saturday. Most likely back up at Fort MacArthur, up in San Pedro. Okay, next slide. Everybody remembers this kid, right? So we were a little bit concerned last week that he was going to turn up. We had our rated cat board, and we were worried, that we may have this little guy showing up. But that didn't happen. We were 14 for 14, which is awesome, which is the 4th year in a row. What some of you may or may not have known was we actually weren't done last Tuesday. So we actually had 15 people that we submitted for rated cat. So go ahead and click that.
Oh, we should have gone to NJ.
Good job. So like we said, everything is a competitive process, right? So you do the work, and you go for the things you want, and if you're the best of the folks that are competing, then you'll get that opportunity. So we had 117 people selected for UFT out of, I don't know, maybe 400 that applied, and 7 got selected for NJET, and our Captain Russell was one. Next slide. What's that?
Sir, do you mind if I just say something?
Absolutely.
So first, you guys are awesome. I wanted to thank all of you. It's been a really long process. I don't know, it's been like a 2-year process to get to this point. And all of you are already doing what you're supposed to be doing for your airmen when you get on active duty. I can't tell you how many times and how many of you have asked where I'm at with it, if it's been submitted, if I got it, if I've heard anything. So I know I'm your superior, but you're already kind of doing what you're supposed to. You're checking up on me as one of your airmen. And I also want to thank you for just being supportive and inspiring. You may not know this, but when I first started looking into becoming a pilot in the Air Force, I almost didn't apply. I thought that I was too old and that I had too much time in grade and that the Air Force probably wouldn't want me to do that. And besides your support and your enthusiasm and the way that you guys don't think in terms of no, that pushed me. But I also want to thank Colonel Grimes for being the person that convinced me that I really did have a shot and that I should do this. And obviously it worked out, so that's kind of awesome. And then I also want to thank the work people. Obviously you can see in the video how awesome and supportive they were. They trashed my office. And I know that no matter what aircraft I go to and end up doing, I'll probably never work with a crew like this again, so they will be the standard for all others. And I just wanted to publicly shout out how supportive and awesome they are and how much they've put up with me talking about flying and putting everything through. And what an amazing boss Colonel Grimes is to be so supportive. And I know that he probably was checking up on things and not even telling, you know, just I have no idea what this man did for me. I really don't. But I do know that everybody in this room changed my life, so thank you.
Before we transition, one more important transition that happened 5 months after the fact. So we finally got our newest NCO, so Staff Sergeant George Krill is on board. He comes to us from Bowling Air Force, or Joint Base Bowling, something. Former Bowling Air Force Base, so right there in Washington, D.C., and over at Andrews as well. So he's got a lot of great experience. We're excited about the experience that he has, the things that he's done, that he's going to bring to the deck. You guys will all get an opportunity. Well, some of you have already PT'd with him. You'll get an opportunity to know him in the coming months and make sure that he's helping you. Like I said, help him help you to stay in the program, to remain in good standing, and do the things that you need to do to stay on this path and have these opportunities. It's the greatest Air Force in the world for a reason, and those standards are high and will remain high, but the rewards are significant as we see today. And of course, this is just, getting selected for a UPT is just the first step, like we tell all of you guys, right? Now you got to go. Now you got to do it. Now you got to, so nothing stops. It just, that bar just keeps going up. So who's got any questions? Not a single question. I could make you all sit here until somebody asks a question. In fact, I'm going to. So.
PSP, do you guys have any questions back there? I know you guys have a lot of questions about selection rate and all that. Nope. Then you want to get selected?
Some changes to the program this year, obviously, with the opportunity to nominate yourself as submit yourself for a rated intent. So if you're, and most impacts, everybody will have the opportunity, but it most especially impacts the non-tech majors. So if you're non-tech and you submit that rated intent, then you will be expected to compete for the rated categorization board. If you go to field training and successfully complete it, you'll be expected to compete the following year, as in your AS 300 year. So make sure you're thinking that through. Get it, Mirza?
Sir, so since force reduction and force shaping is going to be going on throughout this entire year until January, does that mean that the 400s base selection and EADs can change up until that time as well?
I would say, I mean, right now we kind of know tentatively what your base, what your base assignments are. We haven't been formally notified that, but the EAD spreadsheet's been updated, so we've got a pretty good feeling. But yes, as those boards meet this summer, there's going to be, officers that are sitting at bases right in that timeline. In August, they're going to be told that by December, they're going to be separated. And then the Air Force is going to, some of those will be backfilled, some of those will be high priorities for backfill if they were in a 1D position, because, where they're at and the manning at their unit doesn't come into play when the board meets. So the board, in determining who stays and who goes, could end up pulling, separating officers that are in a 1 deep shop where they happen to be. If they happen to be in a shop where they're overmanned, where there's 3 of them in 2 billets, then they obviously won't backfill that. But in that first situation, right, that could create a hole that is a high priority. So if there's, if there's an airfield manager somewhere that gets separated, I don't know if they were even on the list, but if they get separated and they were 1 deep, then absolutely there's a possibility that somebody like you could be redirected to go and fill that. But that's not unique to now, right? That is every day in our Air Force. People have assignments and they get redirected based on the needs of the Air Force. So you always appreciate what you have and what you expect to have, but realize that's always subject to change. You could always get redirected literally up until the day that we prepare your orders. We could find out you're going to a different base. So focus on the job, focus on the mission you're going to have, the lead airman, wherever that is, and then the place that you do that job really is secondary to what we need you to do as commissioned officers, which is the lead airman. So, all right. If there's no other questions, we'll turn it back over to wing staff.
Flight Commander, to control your flight, and we'll transition to PG-620 for open wing inspection.